Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to My Audio Stuff. This is Steve, and do I have a treat for you today? From about 1978, this is the Radio Shack or Realistic STA 90 receiver. This thing was produced from about 1976 through 1978, maybe early 79, and it featured 45 watt per channel amplifier, and really overall this is a sleeper of a receiver. I think I got this on eBay about 3-4 years ago for about 80 bucks. And the only thing wrong with it when I got it was that one of the tape monitor buttons was dirty. That is the internal connections for it. So I went inside the unit, cleaned the connections up on that button, and then blew some of the dust out of it. And it's worked perfectly ever since. All the original dial lights work fine on this thing. This features some interesting things here. This is a dual meter tuner for Radio Shack, and it features on top of that what I thought was, kind of a gimmicky thing, but it's still kind of cool. It's known as QVOX. So you have your speaker control here along with the power control and all of that, and you can go A speakers, B, A, B, and then QVOX, and that activated circuitry, if you had 4 speakers, that would simulate, kind of funny, 4-channel material. Of course, it really wasn't 4 channels, but it's just kind of a novelty. Radio Shack discontinued that, I think, around about 1978. Some of the later models didn't have any of that. But zooming out a little bit, you have the dub-out jack, which was basically a line-out jack. It was very common on receivers, regardless of who manufactured them. Headphones, and then the selector switch here. You can see it. Auxiliary phono, AM, FM, and then FM mute, which I have activated, and then that would light a little light up there. One interesting thing about this particular receiver, not only does it feature 2 meters, but say you want to turn the FM off and just go to AM. If it's just AM, it shuts the power down. That is the lights down on one of the meters. And then it just gives you the signal meter. If you go to FM, then it illuminates it and all of that. 2 tape monitor circuits on it, high and low filter buttons on it, and really these are tastefully engineered behind the buttons, meaning that the cut characteristics are well placed. I think the high cut is around 8K and the low cut maybe 100 hertz, maybe a little lower than that. So they're fairly decent filters, not sloppily designed. Bass and treble, balance, and then mono and loudness, volume control, all of that. Interesting information for the loudness control. Starting in I think it was 1976, and on the first runs of this particular receiver, that's the Realistic STA 90, Radio Shack introduced probably one of the worst design features, I think, of anybody in the audio business. And it was known, and probably some of you will know about this, it was known as perfect loudness. And what perfect loudness was basically the loudness control with the bass boosted into oblivion, so much so that it was unlistenable. And the only way I think that could have gotten started was probably some cigar smoking executive or board member said, I want that on the receivers. And so the engineers cringed and put it on the receivers. So the first run of these, the first year of this, 76 to 77, you can see it in the catalog. It featured perfect loudness. And if you are unfortunate to get one of those from that era, you usually have to replace some of the resistors inside these. I think these are 4K or 6K resistors, for left and right channel. And you want to put like 15K in there or 18K. And then that puts the loudness back into listenable realms. It cuts the boost way back. But this particular one does not feature perfect loudness. This is from about 1978 or thereabouts. One of the final runs of this. So it has normal loudness for normal ears. And because of that, this is a very listenable receiver. It features a fairly sensitive FM tuner. This is, I think, around 2 microvolts. You might be able to tweak it down to 1.9 microvolts. Some interesting features here, obviously. I've said this before, but if you look at the pointer here, when it's receiving a stereo broadcast, it glows red. When it's not, then it turns yellow and or orange, which I thought was just a neat feature. That was a snappy feature that some of the Radio Shack receivers had about them. The back part of this thing, and I'll walk around here, features a fairly simple layout of buttons, or not buttons, but connectors and things like that for the speakers. You can see how the speakers hook up. These are the older screw connectors with some RCAs there in the center. And then, of course, all the hookups for your conventional tape equipment, also coupled with the antenna. Another interesting thing that this features is a switched outlet and an unswitched outlet. And if you're going to hook up like a Bluetooth receiver, that kind of stuff, the unswitched outlet comes in really handy. You can look at the walnut veneer on this thing. It was really just an excellent shape. Plastic, all of that stuff in excellent shape. Has a few smudge marks, but I would simply have to clean all of that up. But I've had this receiver for 3-4 years, and I'm completely pleased with it. Is it going to win any audio awards or anything like that? Probably not. But I think Radio Shack produced a very usable receiver that was, in a general sense, a decent receiver. Another interesting thing about this also is that this features auto thump mute circuitry. And what that means is that when you turned a lot of these early stereo receivers on, you'd often have to turn the volume control down on it for the first few seconds so your speakers wouldn't thump when the amplifier came on. But this has electronic circuitry. Actually, it's solid state circuitry. There aren't any relays that momentarily mutes the speakers when you first turn this on until the amplifier stabilizes. And then I think that same circuitry also doubles as thermal protection circuitry and short protection circuitry. So if you short your speaker leads, it'll mute the speakers so that you don't burn your amplifiers up. Really easy to work on. This thing has 2 circuit boards, I believe, when I was in it. One for the tuner, which is easily serviceable, and then one for everything else. The amplifier and phono circuits and the receiver preamp circuits, all on a single board. But it really is pretty easy to work on. This does feature more or less discrete circuitry in the audio signal path, so it's a pretty dynamic receiver. Op amps at this time probably weren't all that good. I'm sure they're much better today, but at this time, if you wanted, decent audio, discrete circuitry that has individual transistors, was generally the way to do it. Well, that's pretty much everything I have to say about the realistic STA 90. Again, this one is from about 1978. 45 watts per channel, 50 watts per channel, from 20 to 20K. I have another site if you're interested. I have a link for it. It's called A Father's Devotions. You might want to pay that site a visit. Not much more to tell you here. This is Steve with My Audio Stuff.